Last year, my roommate moved out of the house we had been renting together for the past 4 years. By then, both of us had gotten better jobs and were getting paid more, and the house we had wasn't the best, so it was only a matter of time before one of us moved out to get their own place. After he moved, though, I was able to use more of the space in the house and actually just decided to stay there for another year or two. This happened during that time in early December. Our area was going through a week of some pretty bad snowstorms, and the office I worked at allowed us to work from home for a few days if we wanted to. Obviously, I chose to take the offer. I used my old roommate's bedroom as an office and worked throughout the day, but at one point while I was working, there was a knock at the front door. I left the room and checked who it was. There was a man on the porch in a heavy winter jacket. He didn't seem to be a worker or delivery person of any kind, just some regular guy. I opened the door, getting hit by a rush of snow and wind. "How can I help you?" The man smiled and apologized for interrupting my day, then explained his situation. He said his car got stuck in the snow right on the side of the road next to my house, and he didn't have a phone on him, so he asked if he could borrow mine. Obviously skeptical, I told him to give me a minute. Then I closed the door and went to the other side of the house. I looked out the window at the road he was supposedly stuck on. There was a small SUV that looked like it had actually slid into the curb and gotten stuck in the snowbank. Now that I was pretty sure he wasn't lying, I grabbed a jacket and put on some shoes, then went back to the front door. I was still a bit skeptical, but I stood on the porch with him as he used my phone to call his brother, just so that if he did try to run with my phone or anything, I could chase after him or prevent him from leaving. After a quick call, though, the man handed my phone back and thanked me, then walked away. I went inside and checked the window, seeing the man getting in his car. Thinking everything was settled now, I went back to the office and started working again. Around 7, I felt like I'd done enough for the day and took the rest of the night off. It was then that I remembered about the man and his car and went to check on it. But I was surprised to see that the car was still there, and I could see the man moving around inside. It had been almost 3 hours by then, which made me wonder how he was still there. Maybe he was waiting for his brother to get off work and pick him up. I didn't know, but I went to the kitchen and made some dinner, then sat on the couch to watch TV. I stayed up until about 9:30, then went upstairs to shower and get ready for bed. I turned the water on and got in the shower, but a few minutes in, there was an abrupt and sudden banging on the front door. It was loud and harsh, completely jump-scaring me and putting me in a fear-induced frozen state for a moment. The banging was so loud it was shaking the walls, and even across the entire house, I could hear that it was coming from the front door. They were hitting it non-stop, and I could even hear them aggressively shaking the door handle. It was such a sudden burst of chaos that it was hard for me to know what to do. I turned off the shower and quickly got dressed, but as I left my room and walked down the upstairs hallway, everything stopped. It was just silent. No more sounds at all. I stopped in place, hearing only the wind from outside and feeling the eeriness set in before I slowly walked downstairs and up to the front door. Nobody was there anymore. I quickly ran to the window, seeing that the car was still there, but the man was not inside of it. Not knowing what to make of any of it, I called the police. When they came, they noticed multiple sets of shoe prints in the snow, but they were covered up by the storm soon after. They took the license plate of the car, though, and found a picture of the owner. And from what I could tell, it was the same guy that I'd helped on my porch. In the following days, they waited for him to turn up, but as far as I know, he never did. It's really disturbing to think about what could have happened that night right outside my door. Was it that same man desperately trying to get in for some reason, or someone else with a more malicious intent? It seems most think that it was the man running from someone and trying to get help, but what happened afterward is still up for debate. Nothing is really known about that night. Where the man is now and what he was running from are just a few questions on a long list that will probably never be answered. It was January, and I was renting out a winter cabin that was by an ice fishing lake. It was a very small, bare-bones cabin with only the essentials, and was only there for people like me who liked going out to the lake for fishing or ice fishing. I'd usually bring a friend along with me, but sometimes I went by myself and never had any issues with it. I had planned out 3 days there with no other real plans in mind except sitting out by the lake and fishing. On the first day when I got there, I set up my things in the cabin and made myself at home, brewing some hot coffee and relaxing by the fireplace for most of the afternoon. This cabin was only a single room, so the bed, fireplace, and everything else were all in one area. Anyway, I fell asleep early and woke up at 7 a.m. to go out to the lake. It was about a 10-minute walk from the cabin down a short forested path that was entirely covered in snow. Once I reached the lake, I found a good spot, got my things situated, drilled into the ice, and started fishing. I find it to be really stress-relieving to just sit there and fish, though I do know a lot of people find it to be boring. I stayed on the lake for several hours, probably 3 or 4, then packed my things as the snow was starting to pick up and the wind was getting heavier. I walked off the lake and back onto the path, but immediately noticed a set of footprints in the snow going alongside mine from earlier. They went right up to the edge of the lake I was at, then turned around and went back down the path toward the cabin. Feeling a little uneasy that someone was out here and had been right behind me, maybe watching me, I chose to follow the prints and see where they led. They mostly went along with the path going right back to the cabin, but instead of going up to the cabin, they veered off into the woods. As far as I could see, they continued in a straight line going through the trees. Even more confused and slightly nervous, I went back inside the cabin and warmed up by the fireplace. There was nothing else out here for miles from what I was aware of, so anyone being out here was just odd, especially in the winter. I made food and stayed in the cabin for the rest of the night, keeping the fireplace running and mostly just reading. But about an hour after sunset, I heard movement outside, a very light crunching in the snow, but in the recognizable pattern of someone walking. I moved over to the window and looked, instantly seeing a figure out by the trees, walking toward the path. They were wearing thick clothing covering every part of them, making it hard to get any details on what they looked like. Once they got to the path, though, they turned and started coming right for the cabin. I ducked my head down, now just listening to the footsteps getting closer and closer until they were right up to the wall. The footsteps moved to the side, coming right up to the window I was hiding under. Their shadow moved around like they were peering inside the cabin, but then they stopped. I tilted my head up, seeing their eyes staring right back at me. I jumped away, now standing a few feet from the window, as the person quickly tried to lift it open. I ran and grabbed a nearby knife, but after a few more attempts at opening the window, the person ran off. I watched their figure disappear into the snowy woods, going in the same direction I'd seen them come from. After that, I packed up and ran to my car, leaving the area only a few minutes later. I don't know who they were or what they wanted, but they knew I was staying there after seeing me at the lake, and willingly came back in the middle of the night to try and break in through the window. So they definitely had something horrible in mind. Luckily, I got out unharmed, but I have a feeling that that night was close to being my last. I'm a 29-year-old female, and this happened to me just 3 years ago. At the time, I didn't live anywhere near my family, but one of my family members was dealing with something serious, and I needed to be there for a few months at least. My options for living while there were either a hotel, which would be incredibly expensive, or renting a place from a private owner. Finding someone who will rent out for only a few months is not an easy task. Most people's absolute minimum is 6 months. I spent multiple full days looking online and basically had no luck until I got to Craigslist. I knew there was a renting section on the site, but I was trying to avoid it unless it was necessary. Fairly quickly, though, I found a place not too far from where I needed to be. It was a very small house, which hopefully meant cheaper rent, and they didn't specify a minimum lease period. There was a phone number on the page, so I called it. An older-sounding woman picked up. She talked very slowly, but we had a conversation about the property and pricing, and she was kind enough to let me do just a 4-month lease. Fast forward to a few weeks later, I arrived at the property. It was somewhat close to where I needed to be, but it was also very far out of the way from the main city and kind of tucked away in the woods. As previously discussed, the woman didn't meet me there, but instead left a key and some papers taped to the door. I went inside and took a look around. It was very old and kind of cramped. I did a bit of unpacking, then rested after the long drive, not doing much else other than watching TV. Around 7, though, there was a knock at the door. I got up and checked my phone, not seeing any text from the lady saying she was coming over. I walked up and looked out the peephole. There was a man standing a few feet away from the front of the porch. I opened the door. "Hi, how can I help you?" I asked. He kept a serious face as he explained that he was here for the fireplace cleaning. I looked over at his van that was parked in the driveway behind my car, then back at him. "It's a little late, isn't it? Almost 7:30, I remarked. He shrugged and said that's what it was scheduled for. I told him to wait a minute, closing the door and walking back to the living room. I texted the lady and tried calling as well, but couldn't get a hold of her. I then went over to the fireplace, and it wasn't all that dirty. I didn't really know what to think because it wasn't my house. Maybe it was just a cleaning service that the lady had scheduled as part of prepping the house for me. This might sound odd, but fireplace cleaning was such a random service that I thought the man likely wasn't lying. If he had said he was a plumber or something generic, I probably would have been more skeptical. I went back, and when I opened the door, the man was now standing right on the porch, just a couple of feet from me. It almost scared me. I wasn't expecting him to be so close all of a sudden. Before I could say anything, he said he was trying to get out on time tonight and needed to start now. Then, he stepped closer and put his hand on the door, gently pushing it a bit more open. Now, I was getting uncomfortable and rethinking everything. "Yeah, just give me 1 more minute and I'll let you in," I said, trying to close the door. But the man left his hand on it and kept it open, knowing I couldn't close it if he wasn't going to let me. I had no choice anymore but to let him in. I walked him over to the fireplace as he followed me close behind. He went up and looked at it for only a second, and right as he turned around, I took my keys from the counter and ran out to my car. The man's heavy footsteps echoed through the house as I got out and into my car. He ran up to the window just as I turned it on. With his van right behind me, I had to turn off the driveway and into the woods, dodging trees as I quickly made my way back to the pavement and eventually onto the road. I called the police while driving, too scared to stop. When officers arrived, he and his van were gone, having left the front door wide open. It plainly showed that he was not supposed to be there. From what the police and I know, the man probably knew that this house was being rented out, and that whoever the new resident was wouldn't know if he was actually scheduled to clean the fireplace or not, so he might be let in. From there, it's anyone's guess as to what he planned on doing.